Why don't we tell them how we first met? Can you tell that story?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I was living in Mexico, come back to I took a job at the LA Times. I'm from Los Angeles area. And I began to see these Latino gang murders of black people. And so I go, what's this? I knew a lot about gang world, and I don't remember this race, mixed one race on the other kind of violence. And so I get in touch with some guys, and one of them is Richard Valdemar. And Richard Valdemar, bless his heart, takes me aside and kind of instructs me on the MA, on the taxation system. And he goes, the guy who was really involved in implanting the taxation system has just dropped out of the MA, and he's at a prison near here. Why don't you talk to him? His name's Rene Enriquez. And so I write to you because, number one, I wanted to find out more about the taxation system. It sounds to me like if you're a dropout, you'd be easy to talk to. But then also because I wanted to really write more about this Latino v. Black violence. And you called me and go, who are you? What's going on? What is this about? And then filled you in a little bit more. And from then on, I just kept going to Lancaster. And I cannot remember how many interviews we had, but at least 12, 15, maybe 20, because it was an SNY and everyone was cool about talking with it. I would just go up there like every Saturday, wait in line in the visitation room. All the ladies whose husbands were in the system, and that kind of stuff, and all the old white grandparents there to meet their grandchildren. I mean, picked them out. You could write a whole story about the people waiting in line at the prisons, And so I was at the LA Times, and I was just trying to understand, because I came to understand something very important, I think, about the MA, that I don't think people at the Times really understood. And that was that they have the same influence on the outside now because of the taxation system and all that. They almost like as important as the mayor of like Azusa or Alhambra or Pomona or wherever. And I thought we should cover them like that. I thought we should cover the mafia like as if they were public officials.
I've always said ad nauseum that the horizontal integration of the organization into the community was one of the biggest developments of the organization.
Yeah.
It's like a prison gang becoming society-centric and insinuated into the community. And you caught it early on.
Right.
Others, politicians and administrators, they didn't see it, but you caught it early.
My way of thinking was LA, Southern California has never really had a regional mafia the way they had in Jersey or New York or Boston, Philadelphia, until this system. Where, gang members, Latino and the Latino barrios would take orders from guys they really had never met, just heard of, who were now in the shoe in Pelican Bay or Corcoran or someplace, and they would hop to it, and they would go tax people. They would do murders on orders from people that they didn't actually know. And so to me, this felt like an enormous influence of the prison system migrating out to certain areas of Southern California, and that we should cover it that way. Like it was really an important development, had huge influence and impact in the barrios, and also kind of in the prisons, because a lot of times stuff would like echo back and forth between the streets, and so-and-so's not paying up, oh, we'll take care of him, he's on the lista now, that kind of thing. And all of this, none of this I knew certainly when I met Richard Valdemar, and then when I met you. I was like learning all this in endless interviews, which is the job of a reporter. It's not an easy job. It's a pretty simple one, though. You find the people who know more, and you drain them. And Richard was amazing. He was very generous with his time. And then, of course, you. I was trying to think once I saw the mob spot thing. I was trying to think, how many times did I actually go up and interview Rene? But it had to have been at least a dozen, maybe 15, maybe even more.
Without naming the facilities, you would follow me around California when the FBI would move me. And you would come visit me and bring me fruit. He used to bring me mangos and papaya. And he says, you need fruit.
Because you don't eat that stuff, man. I can't imagine living a life without fruit.
Yeah,
It's got such great nourishment.
It was such an awesome experience, and Sam would come visit me, and we maintained this relationship for years and years and years, right?
Yeah.
And then today we finally have our reunion.
It's been a while. It's been several years because I got into other stuff. I left the Times, but it was all part of me trying to write about the phenomenon, which I didn't imagine was possible, of Latino gangs attacking black gangs on the street. And then it turns out not just black gangs, but black residents of whatever neighborhood happened to be.
Let's unpack that for a second, because that's a hugely important phenomena that occurred during that specific era.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the 204th Street gang that killed that young girl, but we had it spread to Highland Park, Hawaiian Gardens, Artesia, Hazard.
Many of these gangs were totally notorious for it.
Florencia 13 was one of the biggest ones, and the large indictments that ensued after this.
Right. When I got onto it, I remember it was a case. The first thing I remember were there's two cases. One was a bunch of murders in the Highland Park area of black people who had moved to Highland Park to get away from Inglewood or Compton or whatever. It was normally blacks moving away from the crack gang problem, and moving to areas where they thought they'd be safe, and it turns out they're in like Latino gang neighborhoods, just as the Latino gangs are figuring out our money is in taxation and in getting rid of black drug dealer competition. And so that was one thing. And then within short order, this was 2 or 3 months after joining the Times in the summer of '04, there was a trial in Pomona Courthouse of 5 gangbangers from Azusa 13.
That was Jacopedia's crew.
Right, exactly. And the idea was these guys had seen that same migration of black people into the Azusa area. Not a lot, but enough to make them very aware and upset. And these guys would go hunting black people, black men. I remember one night, though, the testimony was by one of the guys who dropped out. He said, we couldn't find any black men, so we shot a black woman who was out like 10 o'clock at night saying goodbye to a friend, and she lost her spleen, later testified. I watched her testimony, and I'm going, I don't believe this. They're killing women, innocent bystander types because of this, and that got me into this whole idea that with the MA's edicts on no drive-bys, with the taxation system came something was far less publicized, and that was get rid of the black. Initially, it was black gang members, but then, as one guy told me, you're getting this communication from Pelican Bay through kites and, emissaries and llaveros and all that, and it's being translated on the street by meth-addicted gang members who are like 19 or 16 or whatever, and they're translating it into, let's just get the blacks, And so you began to see, what I began to realize was there had been up to that point a number of years, beginning in the mid-90s, not long after the taxation system takes place, you get this whole series of what looked to me very much like Jim Crow Southern anti-integration violence that you saw in the 50s, like in Birmingham, Alabama, car bombings. I talked to one guy, and Hawaiian Gardens was notorious for this. Some of the gangs were really, Florencia, the Highland Park, the Avenues gangs. Hawaiian Gardens, as one guy goes, we had this meeting, and so this one dude, this tiny little short dude, this skinny guy, walks up to a house while people he actually knew and liked, and tell him, you got to go. And the black owner of the house goes, what are you talking about? You got to go, we're going to kill you. And he's like, get the hell out of here, God damn it. And they firebombed his house, like a firebomb in like Birmingham, Alabama or something like that. And a football player in Hawaiian Gardens, a black football player, was just murdered just walking on the street. You began to see these. I remember in Pacoima there was a curfew. Humphrey Boys gang put in a curfew. I was told by black residents there that you could not walk out after 10 o'clock at night. I remember the first Latino v. black murder was a guy named Demetrius Fears, a guy who had just started construction job, getting it to 7-Eleven. These two Latino gang members see him. One guy walks up, bam, shoots him in the back of the head. I interviewed the other guy who was doing 15 years in prison by that point. The other guy was doing life. The killer was doing life in. So you get these cases that aren't like huge in number. There's not like dozens and dozens and dozens of them. But if you combine that with like graffiti, N-word this, N-word that, right? And you get other like little menacing things, all of a sudden the black population in these areas feels very pinned in.
You know, it smacked of something similar to the Klan would do. You know, that they would.
That's what I thought when I first saw some of this Hawaiian Garden stuff.
You know, and one of the cases that struck out was Resident Evil in the Ramona Gardens. It was a FBI indictment where they were firebombing decades-long residents with their friends.
Right.
They're firebombing these people out of their homes. Florencia Trece called it duck hunting.
Right.
I mean, there's wiretap calls that exist where these individuals said, we're going duck hunting. And they were hunting out East Coast Crips. And then it eventually became any black person.
Well, I think when I was writing about Florencia, and that's another place I began to really focus, I remember counting up the interracial murders, because it was the blacks would respond too. And at no point, it seems to me, at no point was an actual gang member ever killed. I remember a black Jamaican waiter, I think older Latino gardener. You know, it was like all of a sudden it very quickly just bled to whoever was available. Very much like the guys in Azusa said they went hunting and couldn't find anybody, so they shoot this lady. And it was just a remarkable thing that I was not expecting, because I had, first of all, I had started in all this in Stockton, California, when I took a job, fantastic, wonderful job as crime reporter in Stockton, 88 to 92. And it was my dad, my father was a literature professor, now passed away. My mother had died by that point. She was an elementary school teacher. My dad takes me aside. He goes, I was get this job as a crime reporter. He goes, Sam, you know, you sure you want that job? I mean, we're really not a very streetwise family, right? I mean, which is true.
Yeah.
Totally true. I mean, my dad has wrote, before he died, wrote 5 books of poetry and 8 books about Dante and Chaucer and Shakespeare. You know, I mean, it's not really part of, although, you know, they're not really part of our world. But in Stockton, I got to know, I totally dove into that job. I loved that job. I covered 200 homicides, gangs, and everything. And there was a guy named Dale Wagner who was a gang cop, who took me aside, like Valdemar did later, and taught me how to read. And I remember one day he just took me on. He says, okay, I'm gonna teach you how to read gang graffiti. I didn't know what a crossout was. I didn't know what a roll call was. I knew none of that stuff. And Dale, bless his heart, he passed away a good number of years ago. Dale Wagner was just a wonderful guy. And from then on, what I saw was, really up and down California, although certainly in the Norteño area, from him I learned about the shoe war. I saw American Me first time about 5 or 6 times. I've seen that movie, and so. But what I realized was that there was no interracial gang violence, even in LA at the time. This was in the late 80s. It was really black on black, Latino on Latino. And so when I then go away to Mexico for 10 years, live down there, write my first 2 books down there, come back, and the first thing I see is this Highland Park violence against blacks, and then this Azusa case. And I'm like, where did this come from and why? And that's when I began to really learn about the taxation system, and as you were saying, kind of like this influence from the prisons on the outside. You know,
and I think the most sorrowful phenomena that come out of that is that the prison mentality or the ideology from prison gangs, particularly the Mexican Mafia, started impacting community schools where kids were having racial brawls in schools. It became a thing, right?
Yeah.
Chris Blatchford, the guy I collaborated with in the Black Hand, did a series on it, and it was just horrific that kids are going to school. Parents were holding kids back from school.
Yeah.
Kids were going to school, and they were doing interviews with them and say, F that N or F that that Mexican, you know, that's the Mexican, you know, and F them essays, and I saw this impacting children. I know. You know, and these are real children, right? At 13, 12 years old, and they're in school engaging in gang violence, Mexican Mafia and prison violence. And I was like, How the hell did
But
this
see,
happen?
this is exactly what made me think that we as journalists needed to cover the Mexican Mafia and have a chart up. Who is Jaco Padilla? Who's Mike Lerma? Right? Who are the Grajeda boys? You know, all these guys. Black Dan Barella. I wrote to Black Dan Barella, hey man, you want to talk to me about this whole Emmett thing? I sent him my first book, True Tales from Another Mexico.
My favorite.
Thank you. I love that book. It was like my little baby. You know,
there's two chapters in there I love. I think it's Delfino's Gun.
That was the second book.
Yeah, that Delfino's Gun, and in True Tales of Another Mexico, it was Los Jotos de la Fogata.
Right. Yeah.
Like Sam was in Mexico for 11 years reporting on transgenders.
Well, that was one story.
One story.
Yeah,
like
back then they weren't called transgenders. In fact, I don't think these kids were transgender. They were in the whole point of that story, just as an aside, is to say that in Mexico, first of all, it's a machista country, right? And then why are all these men dressed as women all over the place? Well, the reason is because in the lower class, poor, working class part of Mexico, you cannot be effeminate and gay and dress like a man, because you'll never get a boyfriend. In order for a kind of a macho gay man to want to be your boyfriend, he has to have plausible deniability that he knew you were he didn't know you were a man. So you have to dress like a woman. So all these guys, this was so common. All these kids would explain this to me. I spent 2 months living with these guys in this little red light district in Mazatlan.
Yeah.
Very sad fellas, young kids. I mean, they were once you hit 21, your days of being a joto or a prostitute in the district were over. It was like 17, 18.
Real human trafficking.
It was, well, they were, they were all independent. I did not see any pimping going on, but this was the only way they had to make a living. What are you going to do? You could be a cook, hairstylist, or a prostitute if you're dressed as a man dressed as a woman.
I remember one of the phrases that you used was pirujo.
Yeah,
I think it was pirujo for the men who knowingly were with.
it's a little bit related it a little bit to like the prison calculus, man. I'm not gay if I'm the one screwing.
It's called situational homosexuality in prison.
Whatever you call it.
And that's a reality.
It seemed to me.
I've acknowledged it. It's just a reality in prison, right?
Yeah, to me, I remember feeling like these guys. And, by the way, a large number of them were narcos, big old, collares and all the hats, the tejanos and all that. They're out there, all macho and shit, but they were the best. It was assured to me by all these kids, the best clients are the narcos. They will pay all night long, and they got lots of money, and they're very interested in you, this kind of thing. So that was one of the stories that I did. But by the time I came back to LA, I was like, I was back into the world of gang violence and gang stuff that I had left in Stockton. And then that's why I was like, but everything's changed. And the big change was that the prison gangs, particularly them, was out on the streets through the taxation. And of course, taxation meant they had to pay attention to all the little chisme, all that stuff that was going on in whatever neighborhood they purported to control, whether it was Silmar or San Verdugo, Trece or whatever, It was a fascinating thing to watch and to learn about. And I'm here to, I know you guys have been critical of SNYs on this show, and there's probably good reason for all of that. I could tell you from a journalist standpoint, there's nothing better than an SNY. Everybody's dropped out. Are you kidding me? All these gang members are dropped out. It means they'll talk to you. Whereas when they're active in the main line, they're never going to say a word to you, right? And here I'm just like, so it was like fishing trout in a barrel, man. It was just send out a little letter to someone. He'd say yes. Everybody else in the visiting room, I walk into the visiting room, and everyone was shaving their head. You could see every gang member's affiliation, because he tattooed it on his head. It was all there, Longo, whatever. And I'd say, yeah, could I talk to you? I'll come back up another time. And oh, sure, man. I'd write to him a letter. And oh my God, the SNYs were like this enormous gold mine of people who knew what the hell they were talking. You could not find better sources, and particularly if you triangulated. You didn't take one guy's word for it, but you took many people, and they all summed up to a story that you could really understand.
You know what you're talking about is called independent cooperation, right?
Yeah, sure.
Independent cooperation, it's utilized in the intelligence community. Like,
very important.
For SNYs, that was like a font of intelligence, right? So
Totally.
so many people dropping out from so many different prisons. You get information.
All these murders cleared.
Murders, everything. And everybody, one of the phenomena is there's guys to say, I dropped out, but I didn't debrief. But everybody debriefs. So all this intelligence is gathered in one yard, and you happen to be one of the first guys to come along. You and Michael Montgomery from NPR.
Yeah.
And say, I'm going to tap into this reservoir.
Oh, man. And, well, you know what was interesting? When I got into the history of it, the SNY phenomenon really began with you three. You, Stump, Angel Valencia, and David Delgadillo. You guys drop out. You guys aren't really friends. You don't know each other. But the fact that these three carnales drop out of the mafia
At the same time.
at about the same time, everybody else was like, well, hell, I'm not going to take orders to go kill my friend or whatever. Or I owe $1,000 gambling debt or whatever. I'm not going to pay that. I'm just going to. And after a while, all these older veteranos were telling me. I remember this one guy told me, man, these kids these days, he sounds like a guy saying, get off my, don't touch my pomegranate.
Yeah. Get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. He goes, man, these kids these days, they got no honor. They're locking it up. He said they're locking it up in the squad car after their arrest.
Yeah.
I'll debrief, immediately.
It's the truth. I mean, there's guys that.
But you saw that all break apart.
Yeah. Well, nobody really knows that we were the head of that. We were the spearhead of that, right? That they had Mule Creek and they had a couple, like 2 or 3 prisons, like Folsom,
Ione,
Ione, and they had a couple of locations where they had SMY, which was active. Before they had SMYs became really a thing, right?
Yeah.
Before that, they had these 50-50 yards where they just store you in a lesser security yard, intermingle with less violent inmates, and they existed, right?
Yeah.
But when myself, Angel Valencia, and David Delgadillo, I actually made videos for them to bring them over. I said, like, hey,
I think I remember you telling me this.
Come on over, the water's fine.
Come on in.
They're going to kill you anyway, so, here's your chance. I'm telling you, here's the reasons, boom, boom, boom. And they came over.
Yeah.
And then after it was like the gold rush, Eureka, we found it, Yeah,
and I remember we went up, me and Bob Chamberlain, photographer at the Times, went up to Lancaster, and it was like you and Aryan Brotherhood and BGF, Cribs, Bloods. I mean, it was all like, I thought it was weirdly like inspiring almost, because you could see that the gang influence was no longer, and these guys were getting along well. Now, I know that SNYs later, not too much time later, devolved into their own, like, very bizarre and
gang subculture.
Yeah, 2.5s, pesetas, and all that kind of stuff. But there was a moment there when I thought, hey, man, this is kind of cool. Look, these guys they're not like trying to kill each other, and they're all maybe trying to do something positive. I don't know if that's true. I mean,
I think the concept was excellent, right? To create a specific yard for individuals who cannot function in general population, but no longer require being housed in the shoe.
Right.
What happened was, when the influx came, anybody with a drug debt, anybody that just felt intimidated, they come over like, I need to come over. So you have all these guys who've abandoned their gang allegiance, still felt the need for acceptance, and started creating gangs. Like, I wasn't a carnal, but I can become a carnal in this gang now.
Right.
And it just exploded. Zapatistas, 2.5ers, and Brothers by Choice, Gay Boy Gangsters, like every group. We used to call them the Velvet Mafia.
Yeah.
Because if you alienated one of them on the yard, you're not getting a job. They had all the good jobs. They had all the clerk positions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they had some influence, right?
Right.
So you look at the phenomena, it just became to the point now where the CDC can no longer handle that burden, and they created this California model, which is based on the Norway model, and that is a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, man? I spent a good 7-8 years trying to understand and trying to do whatever I could to write about the issues of the MA's influence on the barrios, that kind of thing. And then, you know, I kind of got into my third and fourth books, which were about the opioid epidemic, OxyContin, and I kind of just faded away. And then when I saw your Mob Spot thing, Mundo sent me a link. I'm like, oh, wow, what's this? Check it out. And it's like, oh, my God, man. Just brought back all these memories going up to visit you, going to Avenal, going to West Valley over there in San Bernardino, all these different places where I would, you know, where if my dad saw me, he'd be like, wow, what happened to you? This is not our family. On the other hand, my dad actually he saw The Godfather like 25 times before he died.
It's a wonderful movie.
Yeah, it is. He was all into that stuff because he grew up with the mafia in working class ethnic Eastern Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. So he was like, that was part of it, but I think he was just concerned when I took that first job in Stockton, I was totally out of my element. I totally was. I just had to learn it all like a foreign language sometimes. But the, you know, and then when I was at the LA Times, the problem was trying to push the paper to see what I was seeing with regard to taxation and with regard to Latino v. Black violence. And that was and that was when, you know, I think we even talked about this a couple of times when I was up in Lancaster. I was like, man, it's just like they're not getting it. They're not understanding, you know. But then my editors didn't know a thing about Norteño Sureño even. That was like a revelation to some of the editors. I'm like, are you serious? These are same Latino gangsters just divided by Bakersfield, some street in Bakersfield. They hate each other. Yeah, man, that's the way it is, you know.
I recall that we first started talking because you were going to do a multi-part series on me.
I did. I wrote it.
And then it got spiked.
Yeah.
You know, it got spiked by your editor.
I wrote 4-part series, man. It was the beginning, you know, I mean, I want to be clear. There were reasons, my own, that I blew it. I did not understand that I needed that how to navigate this. I had never been worked in a bureaucracy that big before. That was the first time. And I didn't understand that I needed to navigate the bureaucracy and politically maneuver to get my stories better play or get my stories approval at all. And then I didn't understand if I needed to do that, then how to do that. And I lost some defenders, certain editors I used to have didn't have anymore, and it was just very, very difficult after that to get any support for it. But I would also say that there was like this for a few years there was like this real reluctance to see what I was seeing, I felt, to see what I was seeing on the street and to understand that it was this massive, huge story. What was validating was a whole series of RICO indictments that began to come out in about 2010, 11, 12 that said exactly what I had been telling people in 05, 6, 7, and 8. Right? Now all of a sudden there's all these racial component to the gang violence, and it's you know, and it was racist gang violence. On the other hand, one had to understand too that it was not just that. It was about money, control of drug proceeds. It was a lot of animosity from the prisons, the Crip Wars in the early 80s, and all that was part of it too. But that made it a powerful, powerful, powerful story that never got told until what I remember is really the most important sad moment, very sad moment, which was when a girl named Cheryl Green was murdered by a gang in the Harbor Gateway called 204th Street. And this was a tiny gang. It was not a big gang, but they had totally taken the anti-black violence to heart, because in this little neighborhood, which was like maybe 12 square blocks, it was really small, a bunch of black families had moved believing it was Torrance. It had Torrance neighborhood, Torrance zip code, but it was not Torrance. It was patrolled by it was part of LAPD. And so all these blacks began moving in, and this gang is getting motivated by certain influential people, and of course the whole MA thing and all that, to get rid of the blacks. And they begin a campaign of violence against black people that was very, very scary. and that blacks couldn't go to this market. They have to go to work. You couldn't go through the neighborhood. You had to go around the neighborhood. This kind of thing. It was really cool. And then one day, apparently, what came out in testimony was that this black motorist had ventured through, lost probably, through the neighborhood. These cholos from 204th Street see him, they make chase, he hightails it, they go get a gun at a house where they kind of had commandeered this whole apartment complex, all graffiti in there, they get a gun. One guy, Mono, goes looking for this motorist, finding no black people. He comes upon these 3 or 4 young people, young black kids, Cheryl Green, another girl, 2 black guys, I think, and from about 20 yards away, with another kid who was kind of a wannabe, who the other gang told him, if you want to, you got to put in work, so you go with Mono. Mono just opens fire, bam, 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 shooting in the general direction of these black kids, hits Cheryl Green in the stomach. Cheryl Green is, the kids bundle her into a car, take her to Harbor UCLA Medical Center, where she's pronounced dead, and I wrote that story together with the context of several years worth of very, very scary violence against blacks. A lot of harassment. What I realized was it only took 1 murder a year for the black population to be totally cowed in that area. They were just, because it didn't have to be dozens of murders. It had to, there was like 1 a year. I remember counting it out. And it was like not a lot, but I wrote that story, and that is when the first time, I think, in the LA Times, there was actually a recognition of the black, the Latino v. black violence. And within a week, I could not believe it. I was blown away. There was a press conference in front of that market where blacks couldn't go, with Mayor Villaraigosa, Police Chief Bratton, Lee Baca, Sheriff, and Robert Mueller, head of the FBI. It was just mind-blowing stuff. I was there with a colleague, and we're like, can you believe this, man? You couldn't even, I walked into that market because I'm white, but if you're black, there was not a possibility. And here were these guys, and that is really, and that, I think that had a lot of influence later on the indictment, wording of the indictments, the allegations in the indictment.
Absolutely. Because after this period is when you see indictments month after month. We're talking dozens of indictments of gangs. And they also implemented the gang injunctions. Gang injunctions. They started going like crazy with these gangs. Entire gangs had injunctions. Couldn't congregate, curfews, the whole 9 yards. I mean, Los Angeles went all out. But it was too late. The Mexican Mafia has now become an institution in California, and in fact, throughout the United States. They are metastasizing everywhere.
No, I thought this was a remarkable case. I didn't believe it. I couldn't believe. I mean, I was standing there watching Robert Mueller, the head of the FBI.
Director of the FBI.
I mean, like, is talking, and I'm like, unbelievable. I bought, like, Gatorade at that market a couple of, times and that kind of thing. And that was really where you began to see a recognition at the paper that this was a problem. Still not with the recognition that we should have just blown it out. There should have been like a major 4-part investigative series, which I had already done all the reporting for in the SNYs. Talking to guys I talked to guys who were at this meeting in Verdugo 13 in San Bernardino, and this meeting in wherever it was, in Highland Park or in Hawaiian Gardens. The one kid who firebombed the house of the black family in Hawaiian Gardens, he described to me in vivid detail, this was at Mill Creek, he was by now all dropped out and everything, vivid detail how he went over to the guy's house, and the guy would slam the door in his face, and then they put up these gasoline bombs and everything, and I'm like, unbelievable stuff, and one person alone doesn't make a story, but you start getting all these other people all telling you more or less the same story, and the black residents in Pacoima saying we couldn't even go out of doors after 10, all of that kind of stuff. It was this powerful story. And so very little of that was ever published until I put everything I knew. I dumped it, everything I knew, 25,000 word chapter in a book published by USC about the book was a compilation of academic studies and stuff about Latino black relations in Southern California.
What was the title of the book?
I'm trying to remember it now. I'll send you the link to it, and it's got the cover. And it's not it's kind of an academic book, but it's. I was very, very proud of that chapter, even though nobody read it. I said, man, this is. I left the paper not long after that, and I said, at least I got this down on paper somewhere.
See that you can't recall the title of the book. It shows how prolific a writer you are. In fact, we're gonna include links and graphics for all of his work. So let's talk about like some of your latest projects.
Sure. Well, when I was at the LA Times, the drug war in Mexico kicks off, right? And so I speak fluent Spanish, and so I'm like, they put me on this team. I was in LA, spoke Spanish, so my job in the middle of all that was to cover how drugs are trafficked once they cross the border, right? And as part of that, speaking with the DEA supervisor in Phoenix, she said, we are seeing this enormous increase in heroin. And I'm like, heroin? I thought that was the 1970s. Why would anybody be doing? But little by little, so I put together a big story and eventually turned it into a book about this one town in Jalisco, in the state of Nayarit, called Jalisco. And it's got the name of the state, the same name as the state of Jalisco, but with an X. And these guys have this method of selling black tar heroin. Looks very much like pizza delivery. Back then it was pagers, but then there's cell phones and all that kind of stuff. And I realized then that the reason that they had this big new market and they're expanding throughout the West and all that, now they're in Columbus, Ohio, and they're selling how's this possible? Selling heroin in Columbus, Ohio? There's no heroin there. Except for that I didn't realize that I had missed, because I was in Mexico, the enormous real story was the opioid revolution in pain management in American medicine, meaning every doctor now was told or convinced or eagerly embraced the idea that we needed to use opioids. Doctors need to prescribe those things like wantonly almost. And a lot of people were helped. A lot of people were addicted and their lives mangled, if not ended, because of it. So the first book, and that's when I left the LA Times to take a leave of absence to write this book called Dreamland. And you
Awesome
can put it
book,
up.
by the way.
Yeah,
we'll put it up for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it won. I had written 2 books about Mexico, the True Tales book and Antonio's Gun and Delfino's Dream, which I deeply, deeply loved those books. I thought those books were just magnificent, but like nobody read them. Okay,
they're awesome stories.
Yeah,
I read them.
I loved them too, man. I just like I read them today, and I go, God damn, that's a good story.
Yeah.
But the Dreamland book just blew the lid. I can say this because I lived it. It was just a huge revelation of this whole problem, and then associating it with not only just opioid addiction, but then people switching to heroin, and these guys from this one town in Nayarit being not major dealers, but they were the instrumental in selling heroin into the places where the pills were first being prescribed. Mm-hmm. Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Cincinnati, places like that, Columbus, And that book, it won a bunch of prizes. I did. After that, I had a second career in speaking about my books. And I did 265 speeches in 5 years, beginning in 2015 to end when COVID hit, all over the country, Hawaii, Oklahoma, Maine, you name it, all over. And then along the way is when the next book kind of took shape, because those pills began to drop off. I testified before Congress. I mean, it's unreal. I'll send you the link to that too. It's the health committee before Congress. I'm like, some things that happened in my career that I never imagined would ever happen. Along the way, fentanyl and methamphetamine out of Mexico take over the role that the pain pills and doctors had. And so now what you find, and you'll see this in Skid Row, LA, and the Tenderloin in San Francisco, and Kensington, and Philadelphia, and Portland, and various places, Vegas, real bad, you will see now the synthetic era of drugs. So plant-based drugs, traffickers in Mexico understand that plant-based drugs have a lot of drawbacks. It's so much easier to make your drug. No irrigation, no sunlight, no farmers. You can make it all year round if you have the ingredients to make these drugs, which they do from China because they control a lot of the shipping ports, Manzanillo, Michoacan, the Mexico City Airport, Ensenada. They control a lot of that, and so they can get and so what's happened is they can get almost endless quantities of these ingredients, right? Which means they can make endless quantities of methamphetamine, kind of a substitute for cocaine, or fentanyl, which is what used to be called by the trafficking world down there, heroína sintética, synthetic heroin. And so now you've got these two drugs coming together, sometimes used together, sold together, and all that, nationwide.
You know what struck me is
and that was my last book, The Least of Us.
The Least of Us.
Yeah.
So what struck me was opioids have been here for a long time. I used to use heroin, right? Before synthetic heroin or fentanyl ever made the scene, right? And then I also used meth. I dabbled with that a little bit. But this phenomenon existed long before the introduction of fentanyl. It wasn't until it became mainstream America and it became a huge plague and epidemic where now, one of my recent visits to LA was in downtown and I saw people doing, what did you call it?
The fentanyl fold.
The fold. They were just on the streets.
So you see people going over a period of weeks going like that. So they're almost like an inverted L. And that's from fentanyl. The same way a heroin nod used to be like this.
Yes.
The fentanyl is much more potent, so it just takes the body down further.
I saw it at the time I was in downtown. It was like a third world country. I was fresh out of prison. I went down there and I said, oh my God, there's people shooting dope right on the bus stop. And nothing, and people naked, knotted out, laying in the streets. And I was like, oh my God, 6th Street and 5th Street were like war zones.
I know. Yes.
Third world countries.
Really sad.
I couldn't believe it. And now you talk about the depth of this. It's just amazing that it was allowed to get to this proportion.
But I think it has to do with supply. The supply is unregulated. It's mitigated. They can make it and make it and make it. And now there's lots of people, particularly in the Sinaloa, Durango, Nayarit areas, up into Tijuana. So many people know how to make it now. And the methamphetamine story is a major part of this as well, even though that's not killing people the way fentanyl kills people. The potency is through the roof. The DEA seizures are sample tests are showing 95 to 97% pure meth, so it's only 3% adulterant, and there's so much of it on the street that nobody cuts the meth anymore because you would lose customers if you did that because it's so much of it. Prices drop like 90% in most of the areas of the country, and what that means is you are also getting probably what you also saw in Skid Row was a meth-induced psychosis that is pronounced and lasting past use, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, your brain just kind of, and it's just, and of course, all of this is hampered by the utter violence and damage and chaos of the street itself, right? And so, all of this, it's very much seems to me like this is just a function of how much they're able to make. They're just able to make it. You cover the country with methamphetamine, and you drop the price by 90%. Imagine how much meth you would have to make for that to be true. So I kind of take it like it's supply. Is it supply or demand or a combination of the two? I think I have to tell you, when I was living in Mexico, I didn't write about drugs. I was a freelancer. I was living hand to mouth. You're not making a lot of money as a freelancer. I didn't have any corporation backing me up, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, any of those guys. So I never wrote about drugs. I wrote a few things about drug culture. I wrote the first chapter in the True Tales book is about Chalino Sanchez, the singer, the narco corrido singer.
You also wrote about Malverde.
Right, Malverde, but I didn't write about Chapo Guzman or any of that kind of stuff because I just didn't have the backup. I was poor and on my own, but also I felt that immigration was a much bigger story. Back then it was. Then drugs took over. But at the time, I bought. If you would have asked me, why is there so why is the narco problem in Mexico so big? And I would say, well, the Mexican government says it's the demand for drugs in the United States. And there's certainly something to that. But with synthetic drugs, I think it's flipped. And now I truly believe this is about supply creating demand. Fentanyl in particular, take fentanyl, for example. It is being put in cocaine. Now, if you're a cocaine user, do you really want to become a fentanyl addict or die from fentanyl? No, but people put it in there because they know if they addict you, you will become a fentanyl user. You will not buy from me every 2 weeks. You'll buy from me 5 times a day, right? And it's a customer enhancement tool. Even though you might die along the way, in fact, most people will die, you get this enormous transformation of people into fentanyl addicts.
It seems incredibly insidious.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
But it's ingenious.
They figured it out with this one, I wrote about it in The Least of Us. They figured it out with this one chemist in 2006 who had a Mexican guy, lived most of his life in San Diego, learned to make fentanyl, went to prison, learned to make it better, was deported, and an element of the Sinaloa drug cartel hires him to make ephedrine, which was what they were then using to make methamphetamine. And instead he makes fentanyl. And they sell it into, they are upset at first, but then he goes, oh, look, this is the most profitable drug you will ever see. And they begin to sell it into the gang world in Chicago and Detroit. Many people die. Many heroin addicts there go running for it and they die. And then they bust the lab, which he was using, where he's making the stuff, and the deaths drop off. So supply increases death. Lack of supply, it's a harm reduction measure, basically. But with that, the Sinaloa drug world learned that there was such a thing as synthetic heroin, kind of. They had already seen the benefits of making methamphetamine. They were heavily into making methamphetamine by then. There was Nacho Coronel, who was kind of like the czar of the crystal, and then lately it's the Nueva Generación cartel that's took over from him after he was killed by the military. So all of that is part of what, to me, began to convince me that this was not demand driven. It was people were getting addicted just purely by the enormous supplies of the stuff, and then their addiction was being exacerbated by the supplies. So if you were homeless and you started using methamphetamine while you were on the street, the act of doing that would mean that it would be very, very difficult for you to ever get off the street. And so you continually use methamphetamine, or sometimes you would use methamphetamine that would lead to your homelessness, and then of course you would be just straight down a slippery slope. Fentanyl is the same thing too. It's like people have been completely addicted without their understanding of what was happening, and now lots of people on the street who have survived, a lot of people have died, of course, but those who have survived, most of them are straight up fentanyl addicts. And the thing about fentanyl is this. Fentanyl is, your listeners should know, fentanyl is a magnificent anesthetic. I've had fentanyl, had a heart attack in 2017 during all my speaking and all that, and they gave me fentanyl. Fentanyl has been used as an anesthetic in American surgery for decades, and it is a wonderful drug. Why? Because one reason, there's several reasons. One of them is it takes you in and out of anesthesia very quickly. So I could have a stent put in my artery, and then within 2 minutes of that operation being done, they would take me off fentanyl, I'd be up and talking to you lucid. On morphine, it would be 4 hours of dopiness, And so, but see, it's that very nature of fentanyl, that in and out, the quick in and out, that is why it's such a great drug for traffickers. Because if I get you addicted to it, all of a sudden, it's not like heroin, you use it twice, maybe 3 times a day. With fentanyl, you got to be using, particularly as the supply increases and the tolerance really rises. That's what those people in the fentanyl fold, those guys have been using for some time. They got some very, very serious tolerances going. Well, they have to be using 5, 6 times a day. They're magnificent customers if you're a dealer. And so I really have changed my thinking on all this. And for me, it really feels an awful lot like supply is creating demand rather than the other way around.
It's so refreshing to talk to somebody who's so well heeled on the topic, somebody as articulate
Thanks.
as you and done the research.
Thanks, Rene.
Just on the broad range that encompasses gangs, the subculture, how it impacts the
Yeah.
community, the Mexican Mafia in particular. Your knowledge has always impressed me because you went out and learned it. You
Yeah.
became one of the experts in the nation on this.
Well, from talking with dudes like you, my friend, seriously, it was like I would come home after our interviews. I would call my wife. Honey, you're not going to believe what he just told me, and I can't, and it would go through whatever we talked about that day, and she'd be like, my wife loves what I do, but sometimes the stuff that I talk to her about, she's not so keen on hearing.
Yeah.
But it was mind-blowing stuff. Just mind-blowing. It was like this brand new frontier that I had never really, I mean, I had learned a little bit with Dale Wagner up in Stockton, right?
Yeah.
I had never gotten into this deep. And it was made possible by a willingness of people like you and others, and the SNY, and Richard Valdemar, which bless his heart. Richard, I owe a undying debt of gratitude to that man for just being willing to take aside a reporter and educate him. That's too many times cops say, I will never talk to reporters. I think you're making a huge mistake doing that. It's so important for reporters to get educated, and of course you find people who really deeply want to know, like me. Those are good people to educate, because then they're not going to come up with stupid, bizarre, unreal, non-commonsensical ideas of why these things are happening, but they can base it in real life conversations like with you so many times.
Well, with that said, I am so humbled to have contributed something to your expertise. I think we're running out of time here. We'll post the links to Sam's books and all his documentaries, everything he's done, everything we can get, we'll post it up for you. With that said, thank you so much for being here.
On the contrary, Rene, it's so great to see you again, man, and doing well. And
we'll do it again.
Truly honored to be on the Mob Spot and give my best to Mundo.
I will. Peace out, folks.
Adios.